How's everybody doing? Y'all okay? Everybody's feelings still intact? That's good. Shout out to the college football graveyard. A bunch of deadbeat teams and programs that just can't compete with UGA. I don't know what I'm going to end up doing with the helmets and the helmet shelves and the wall display and all that. I mean, the reality is right now there's just not a single team in the country that deserves to have their helmet placed anywhere close to UGA on Uncle Lou's helmet wall. I do have the college football playoff helmet up there just because, well, why not? Georgia owns the college football playoff, just like they own this entire graveyard of deadbeat teams who wish they were as good as Georgia. But I do want to just talk a little about the game in this video without a whole lot of trash talk. It's really hard to... In one way, there's so much to talk about. I mean, when you score 65 points, there's a lot to talk about there offensively. When you hold an opponent to 7 points, 36 yards rushing total for TCU, when you 3 turnovers forced by the Georgia defense. So when you have something like that, there's a lot to talk about. But on the other hand, the game was just so overwhelming for TCU. There's almost nothing you really need to say. I'm definitely not going to get on here and laugh at TCU or make fun of the TCU fans. For one thing, there's just not a lot of them. I joked about it a little leading up to the game, but in all seriousness, TCU just is a really small school. There's about 9,000 students there a year. It's not like here on the internet or on YouTube or whatever that there's just thousands and thousands and thousands of TCU fans all over the place that I could get on here and needle or brag to or whatever. It just doesn't exist. And nobody thought TCU was going to be in this game at the beginning of the year. Hell, nobody thought TCU was going to be in this game 6 weeks ago when they were 10-0 and 11-0 and then 12-0. I mean, nobody ever believed in them. And the reality is they made it here, and 128 other teams didn't. So I do want to congratulate TCU for a great year. As a college football fan, I love stories like that with TCU. I liked when Cincinnati got in, last year. I think as sports fans, we all love an underdog story. So I'm not going to get on here and talk a lot of trash today about TCU or rub in the win or whatever. I do want to talk about the win, though, and its significance and its place in history and things like that. And this is a historical win. You can, whatever excuses fans of other teams are making about, TCU didn't deserve to be there. We hear that every year, every single year. Whatever team loses, you got a certain segment of college football fans that, instead of giving the team that won credit, they'll point to the team that lost and just say, well, of course they won. Look who they played, that kind of thing. Georgia wins 65-7. Not only is that the biggest, well, first of all, not only is that the most points scored in a national title game ever, however, whatever you want to count for that, playoff era, most points scored. BCS era, most points scored. Not only was it the most points scored, not only was it the biggest margin of victory in the history of the college football playoffs, not only was it the biggest margin of victory, even including BCS title games, which go all the way back to 98, this was the most lopsided victory in college football bowl game history, going back 100 years, from when the first bowl game was played, whether you're talking about the big games like, the Rose Bowl and the Fiesta Bowl and the Sugar Bowl and the Orange Bowl back in the day and the Cotton Bowl and all those big bowls, or whether you're talking about Meineke Car Care Bowls or Gasparilla Bowls or Walk-On Bowls or Liberty Bowls or any bowl. This is the most lopsided win in the history of bowl games. You can pretend TCU is the worst team in the history of college football if you want to, and that's the only reason that happened. Or you can join me in reality. It's warm over here. You might like it. You can come on into reality with the rest of us who understand Georgia just played one of the best college football games any of us have ever seen, period. Offensively, defensively, you talk about the offense. You go into a lot of games, I think, as an offensive staff, and even as a fan, you go, I feel like this defense is going to try to take away our ability to run the ball, so we're going to have to probably take some deep shots and see if we can get them that way. Or I think the team's going to try to take away our ability to throw downfield. They're going to play soft coverage, so we're going to have to maybe run the ball or try to hit some underneath stuff. It's like a cat and mouse game, like a game of chess, between the two teams. That was not the case yesterday. Georgia was able to run the ball between the tackles. They were able to run the ball wide. Stetson was able to run the ball, 2 rushing touchdowns. He wasn't touched on either one of them. The jet sweeps were successful. We ran a reverse that was successful. Zone reads where Stetson either hands it off or keeps it and goes around the corner was success. Any which way Georgia wanted to run the ball, it worked. When Georgia wanted to throw the ball deep, they threw the ball deep and it worked. When Georgia wanted to throw over the middle, they threw over the middle and it worked. When Georgia wanted to work the edges on out routes and comeback routes, it worked. When Georgia wanted to work the screen game, it worked. The hitch passes that Georgia's been throwing all year at the line of scrimmage, it worked. Literally everything Georgia did worked, and they ran a little bit of everything. It was just an unbelievable offensive performance from Georgia yesterday. Defense. TCU couldn't run the ball. TCU couldn't throw the ball. TCU couldn't block Georgia's defensive front. TCU couldn't hang on to the ball. TCU had 36 yards rushing total in this game. Max Duggan had negative 38 yards rushing in this game. He did have a couple of runs of 4 and 5 yards, but when you add in the sack totals, which college football, I don't agree with this. I don't like that they do this, but college football subtracts your sack yards from your rushing total, and that's how Duggan ended up with negative 38 yards. He was sacked 5 times. Georgia defensively forced 3 turnovers, 2 Max Duggan interceptions, and a fumble recovered by Georgia, right? And the same Georgia player involved in all 3 turnovers, Javon Bullard with 2 interceptions and the fumble recovery, defensive MVP. TCU couldn't run the ball, they couldn't throw the ball. Quentin Johnston, that's all we heard about. I was a little worried about Quentin Johnston myself. I talked about him leading up to the game. He had 1 catch for 3 yards. Non-factor. You didn't hear Keely Ringo's name mentioned very much. You didn't hear Kamari Lassiter's name mentioned very much. Georgia's 2 starting corners. You know why? They didn't do anything wrong. Outside of that 1 busted coverage in the first quarter where TCU basically had 2 wide receivers stacked on the outside. They ran a switch route at the line of scrimmage where they crisscrossed Georgia's 2 DBs, which I believe was Keely Ringo and Javon Bullard, got confused. Bullard, I believe, is the player that went with the wrong man, which left the TCU receiver wide open. That led to TCU's only touchdown of the game, by the way. That was Javon Bullard early in the first quarter, I think, that sort of blew that. Boy, he more than made up for it, though, with the 2 interceptions and the fumble recovery. About the only thing that went wrong for Georgia in this game, 1 busted coverage, which we just talked about, and they missed that extra point at the very end of the game, or it would have been 66-7. It was just an absolute football clinic from UGA. Stetson, over 300 yards, 4 touchdowns through the air, 2 on the ground, offensive MVP. He wins his 4th college football playoff offensive MVP award. No one else even comes close to that. And you've got some quarterbacks who played in a lot of playoff games. Trevor Lawrence, for example, played in the playoffs every single year he was in college. He doesn't have 4 playoff MVP awards. Stetson does, though. It was just an absolute clinic. What does this mean for Georgia historically? Well, all it really means for Georgia historically right now is they've got 4 national titles that they claim, right? And still the 4 that they don't claim. Georgia now has been awarded a total of 8 national titles, or a national title in 8 different years. Georgia only claims 4 of those. I don't have a problem with that. There's some Georgia fans are really upset about that the university won't claim the other 4 national titles. I don't particularly care. To be honest with you, so Georgia claims the titles in 1942 when they were undefeated, 1980 when they were undefeated, 2021 when they won the college football playoffs the first time last season, and now 2022 at 15-0, Georgia claims those 4 national titles. So overall, what does it mean? It means Georgia's got 4 national titles. What does going back-to-back mean? Well, it's significant. It hasn't happened very many times in the history of college football. It's happened now. It happened about a decade ago when Saban and Alabama did it in, I think, 11 and 12. Is that right? I believe it was 11 and 12. Alabama won back-to-back. That was pre-playoff era, so that was BCS era. Georgia's the only team to do it so far in the playoff era. Prior to that, you had Southern Cal win back-to-back titles in the 2000s. One was a split title. The other title was then sort of taken away, but whatever. I think we all kind of know what the deal with that is. No one really cares. You won the title, I guess. So you had back-to-back for Southern Cal. So basically about once a decade, you go into the 90s, Nebraska back-to-back in the 90s, and I believe 94 and 95. No back-to-back title winners in the 80s, although Georgia came close. Georgia won the Natty in 1980. And then in 1981 and 1982, they were one game away each year from a Natty then, but only won the one. So no back-to-backs in the 80s. It happened twice in the 70s. Alabama, and I think, is it Oklahoma? I might be getting the second team wrong. Anyway, it happened in the 70s. It happened in the 60s. It happened in the 50s. It's happened about once a decade. Already the talk about a possible three-peat. I don't want to get into a lot of that right now. I'd rather just enjoy the fact that Georgia won the national title yesterday, whether it's back-to-back or not. I'm just celebrating the fact that Georgia won the national title for the 2022 season. I'm still in celebration mode for that. Maybe I'll make a video down the road, a day or two, a week, whatever, where we can talk about three-peating, which has happened before, by the way, in the 30s, which is, of course, considered pre-modern era. That was before you even had an AP poll. But Minnesota won 3 in a row. Minnesota won 3 natties in a row in the 30s. But so we could talk about that down the road. But just an amazing game and an amazing season, 15-0. I think they're only the third team in college football history now to go 15-0. Immediately, and I get it, especially on a channel like mine where there's a lot of trash talk, some of the first things you're hearing from other fans is, well, this team wouldn't beat such and such team from this year, or this team wouldn't beat that team from that year. Okay. They didn't have to. You couldn't beat, this team wouldn't have beat 2019 LSU. Okay, well, 2019 LSU wouldn't have beat 1995 Nebraska or 2001 Miami, would they? No. Does that mean LSU didn't win the Natty in 2019, though? No, of course they did. They won the Natty in 20. LSU was the best team in the country in 2019. That's all they needed to be to win the Natty, was the best team in 2019. They didn't have to be better than some other team in the past, and Georgia doesn't have to be better this year than some other team in the past. I don't particularly care. People ask me all the time who I think the best college football team ever was. Ever? I don't know. I can talk about my lifetime. My lifetime is 1995 Nebraska. I think that's the best team I've ever seen in my lifetime, was 1995 Nebraska. That doesn't take away from how good Texas was in 2005, though, or whatever year they won the Natty, or how good Auburn was in 2010, or how good Clemson was in 2016, just because I think 1995 Nebraska was better. So, I mean, if you want to keep typing to me that 2019 LSU and 2020 Bama are better than this year's Georgia, whatever, that's fine. I don't really care. The 2020 Bama thing is a little silly. In a season where you played no non-con games, you had a shortened regular season, and no one cared or watched college football for an entire year, I would throw that out completely. 2019 is a legitimate argument for LSU. That was an amazing team, no doubt about it. 2019 LSU might be the best team of the playoff era, if you want to, if I'm being honest. But again, that doesn't take away from my excitement or joy from winning the national title in 2022. The fact that some typer troll on the internet tells me that 2019 LSU is better, great. It's a shame LSU can't field that 2019 again. Then maybe they could do something. Because since they won that title in 2019, they hadn't done anything but dribble down their leg over and over and over again. But anyway, I digress. But it was a great game, undefeated, a perfect season. Shout out to the Florida man, by the way. Florida man has no idea what it's like to watch their team have a perfect season. How is it possible that Florida's been playing football for 100 and something years and has 0 perfect seasons? That's weird. That's weird. Steve Spurrier was there for all those years, all those offenses, all those Heismans. 1 national title. Steve Spurrier had 1 national title, and it wasn't a perfect season. He lost the game. Urban Meyer had a good 3 or 4 year run at Florida. Didn't have any perfect seasons, though. Not even with Tim Tebow. Georgia does, 15-0. Already had 2 other ones prior to that anyway, so type about it. Type. I'm trying not to troll in this video. I'm trying to do a serious video. This was an absolutely amazing game. And one of the things I got excited about watching this game, and let's be real, when it got to the second half of this game, you had to find things to try to get excited about the game. The game was just completely over. The game was over in the first quarter, really, but particularly the end of the second quarter when Georgia scored to go up, I think 24-7, kicked off to TCU with like a minute and a half to go. TCU immediately turned the ball over. Georgia gets it back in plus territory with a minute to go, scores again, 2 touchdowns in a minute and a half, basically, to go up 31-7, or was that 38? No, I think that put them up 38-7, actually. Then they got the ball to start the third quarter, and you're thinking, well, it's about to be 45-7. They actually didn't score on that possession, though, first possession of the third quarter. That might be the only possession they didn't score, though, up and down the field. Up and down the field. But one thing I enjoyed, especially in the second half of this game, was watching the game and going, okay, he'll be back next year. 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 That guy's coming back. He'll be back. That guy's a true freshman and has 2 sacks today. He's coming back. Bear Alexander's a true freshman on the defensive line and is dominating. He's coming back. That's where you start to get excited. Now, I'm not doing the look ahead to next year thing really right now, but it's something that you couldn't help but notice when you watched last night's game, partly because you're also thinking about the players that are playing their last game ever in a Georgia uniform. Stetson Bennett, Nolan Smith on the sideline, who of course didn't get to play out with a season-ending injury about halfway through the season, but seeing him on the sideline. Jalen Carter, last game in a Georgia uniform, he'll be a top 5 pick. Keely Ringo, last game in a Georgia uniform, he's a first-rounder. Several, Darnell Washington, last game, he's a first-rounder. Several of the offensive linemen, last game, first-rounder. But the majority of the players that you saw last night making plays for UGA are going to be back next year. Stetson's gone, of course, but Carson Beck played in the second half and looked good, and there's a lot of smart people that are really high on him. He definitely is a more prototypical QB in terms of what you look for than Stetson Bennett was. Not to say he'll be better than Stetson Bennett or to do the things Stetson Bennett did, but he's got all the tools. He can make all the throws. He's got a legitimate NFL arm. He's been in the system for 3 years. He's a junior. He's been in the system 3 years. And he's going to have every opportunity to succeed next year because when you look at what's going to be around him, of course, Brock Bowers is coming back. Half the offensive line is coming back. We're only losing 1 running back out of the 8 we use in every single game. Our 3 best pass catchers are coming back. Darnell Washington, Ladd McConkey, and A.D. Mitchell. We've got a slew of other wide receivers that played in backup roles this season. Plus, we have already brought in from the transfer portal Mississippi State's leading wide receiver from last season and Missouri's leading wide receiver from last season. Offensively, I don't know how people are going to stop Georgia next year. I really don't. And then when you look over on the defensive side of the ball, we lose probably our most talented player in Jalen Carter. We lose our best secondary player in Keely Ringo, and we lose our most experienced defensive player in Christopher Smith, safety. So that's a defensive lineman, a corner, and a safety. The other corner, Kamari Lassiter, coming back. Javon Bullard, the defensive MVP of the game yesterday, he's a nickel corner. He didn't even start this year. He's a nickel corner. He comes in on nickel situations. He'll be the starter probably at another corner, at the other corner next year opposite Kamari Lassiter. All of our inside linebackers are coming back. The first 4 or 5 inside linebackers on the depth chart, all coming back. Pop Dumas Johnson, Smile Munden, Xavier Sori, Ryan Davis, all those guys. Michael Williams is a true freshman. He had 2 sacks, I think, yesterday at outside linebacker. He's started a lot of games this year, and he's played in every single game. Bear Alexander, I talked about on the defensive line. So the talking point after Georgia won the national title last year was, well, Georgia had a good year, but it was a generational defense. It's all gone to the NFL. You got 15 players drafted. You're in rebuild mode. You're starting over. No way Georgia repeats. Well, not only did Georgia repeat, they beat everybody they played. They finished the season 15-0. Well, everything you said last year was true about Georgia's defense and how young it was going to be this year. What does that mean for next year? It's all coming back. Georgia's defense will be better next year than it was this year. The offense, I think, has the potential to be better as well. Clearly, it's going to come down to the quarterback situation. But if you start looking ahead to next year at who you think the top-ranked teams might be, there's a lot of new quarterbacks. Bama's replacing their quarterback, and they've got no clear answer. Jalen Mildew, their backup this year, has looked horrible to me when he's played. Now, the Alabama fans don't like him either, but they tell me he's not going to play. They tell me it's going to be Ty Simpson. I don't know. All I know is this year, when Bryce Young came out, Jalen Mildew went in. Maybe next year Jalen Mildew doesn't play, but that's what it looks like now. C.J. Stroud, of course, is leaving Ohio State. Clemson's got Cade Klubnik. Southern Cal is really the best team with a returning QB. Not to say they're the best team. I mean, if you look at like teams in the top 10, who's got the best returning quarterback? It's Caleb Williams, of course, at Southern Cal, who won the Heisman. But Lincoln Riley's defense, or lack thereof, is going to keep them from doing anything. So Georgia's going to be very well positioned heading into next year, and we got plenty of time to talk about all that with scheduling and whatever else. But just an amazing feeling. And I said this last year in my post-game national championship kind of review video, and I'm going to say it again. I love talking trash to when it comes to college football. But I do hope that every single diehard college football fan, regardless of who you're a fan of, whether it be Florida, South Carolina, whatever, I hope you get to experience what I have got to experience the last 2 years. I don't love college football any more today than I loved it 10 or 12 years ago when Georgia was, a 9-10 win season was a good year. I don't suddenly love college football more now that Georgia has won a national title or won 2 national titles or is the best program currently in the country. It doesn't make me love college football more. But when you're a diehard college football fan, it's impossible to describe the feeling you get from watching your favorite team win a national title. It really is something you have to experience. And knowing how special, especially last year, it was for me to see Georgia win a national title, and knowing that anybody who takes the time to come around this channel is obviously a diehard college football fan, I do hope that all of you get to experience that at some point in your life as a fan. I hope it doesn't come at Georgia's expense whenever it happens to be. But nobody stays on top forever. I mean, Clemson had a run where they won a couple of national titles in a 3-year period. Bama, of course, has won a ton of national titles. We talked about some other teams that went back-to-back and had really good 3, 4, 5-year runs. Georgia's doing that right now. I don't know how long it will last. This could be the last title Georgia wins for the next 40 years. I doubt it. It doesn't look that way right now. But the reality is, I'm enjoying these moments while they're here because I watched a lot of Georgia football before I got to see this. A lot. I was 2 years old in 1980. I'm 44 now. So it took me a long time to see Georgia get to the point where they're at now. And it is a good feeling. And if you're a diehard college football fan, I sincerely hope you get to experience what I've got to experience at some point in your life as a fan. What I've got to experience the last year or two. But an amazing season by the Dogs. Clearly the best team in the country. They were all year long. And a national title, well-deserved. 15-0, back-to-back national titles. Talk a little bit more about the game over the next week or so, and then it's on to talking about 2023. All right, everybody, I appreciate you watching, and have a good morning.